welcome to Have Your Say here on Mainline 21 television. I'm Ann Minicozzi, president of the Community Breakfast Collaborative, here with our co-host Diana Robertson, who is president of the Mainline branch of the NAACP. And we are happy to welcome back Superintendent of Police, Radnor Township, Chris Flanagan, and Kevin Stroman, who is Mainline Mentoring, and he is also the vice president of the Radnor Township Civic Association. So we welcome everybody back for our part 2 program about community policing and community relationships. Before we start, just to set up this program, we have 3 things that we really want to try to talk about in our 28 minutes. We want to just begin because we're recording now, outside of Philadelphia here on the main line. And we want to begin the program with a moment of silence, good thoughts, prayers for Walter Wallace Jr., who was shot in Philadelphia by a police officer. We want to keep in our prayers and good thoughts, and during that moment of silence, our police officers and all the members of our community. So just a moment of silence. And I want to just say, before we start our conversation, that one thing that I think viewers should be aware of and probably know from our previous program is that myself, Diana, and Kevin and Chris all know each other. We're all in relationship with each other. We're part of our community all together. We dialogue with each other. We're in relationship with each other. And so it's really important for that to be said at the outset, that we're all in community with each other. So when something like this happens, we already know each other. We may have different views, different ways of trying to talk about this. We're trying to talk about this subject of community policing, but especially about the most recent shooting, to address that first before we go on to our other topics, to talk about that in a way that we can still be community with each other. That's really important. And so the way that we want to begin here is with mutual respect for each other, and that we all live in community with each other. But this is very painful that this kind of thing happens and continues to happen. I just saw a statistic that this was on the PBS NewsHour, that in 2020, 1 African American per week has been shot by a police officer. So it's really painful and difficult to deal with. What we're trying to do in terms of this situation here is to acknowledge that we don't know everything that happened, and that the shooting is under investigation. And what we're trying to do really in this program, as far as this, is to just to acknowledge that we're in a snapshot of time right here, and there's things that we can say, and there's some things that we can't say yet. But just to acknowledge, first of all, about Walter Wallace Jr. and the painful situation and the reality that this is. Carrying forward from the last program, we talked about our relationships with each other, but one thing that Superintendent Flanagan mentioned is that community policing, community practices, it's all fluid and evolving. And if someone has an idea, the police are open to trying some new things and that kind of thing. So just trying to set up our conversation here. So we're really going to talk about Radnor Township locally, and then try to talk about the state level, and then also the national level, really in terms of several points. So I hope I try to set that out and go forward from there. So welcome to everybody, and glad that we're here together and having this conversation and program today.
Yep, thanks.
So Diana,
And the only one other thing I just wanted to add when we're talking about, prayers for everybody, the family as well. We have to have prayer, there must be prayers for the family who is clearly, definitely in pain. Mother has lost her son, and their other relatives. So I just wanted to make sure we included the family as well. And so as we move forward, I think, we're talking about community policing, but I think we do have to bring in some other things about what it means for training, different types of training, and how, like I said, starting with the local area, what does that mean for the Radnor Township Police Department or the different police departments on the main line in general, possibly. So I think if we can start there, that would be great.
Absolutely. So the police departments, this is what's exciting about having, in my opinion, municipal police departments that are able to adapt to each community's needs. So there's many great things about having countywide or state agencies, and obviously we have the state police. But when it comes to an individual township like Radnor, the citizens who elect the commissioners, and the commissioners select the township manager, and the police department falls under the direction of both those parties, with the exception of laws, which obviously come either from a federal or state level. It allows them to have a very handcrafted approach to what they need and what their expectations are as a community. That means we can add on to the base level. But let me build the base level out, responding to Diana's question, is that we are trained by the Pennsylvania State Police, MOPEC. We have to meet a set of standards physically, training-wise. And once we pass the academy, it's a pass or fail scenario. If you fail, you cannot be a police officer in the Commonwealth. So it's an important foundation to lay. So I could work in Pittsburgh or I can work in Radnor, if that makes sense. Once you pass those standards, which I can forward to you, and just so the community knows, it's of public record. If you type in Pennsylvania State Police, then you put in municipal training officers, there's a commission that's established by many different departments, small, big, wide, whatever it may be, different parts of the state. And they keep updating those standards that officers have to meet to pass the process. And then there's certain things that you have to do as a police officer once you become a police officer. So you have to be certified to a police department so that the standards of training and update training, very important, we'll go back to update training, continues. And then if not, then you have to go back to an academy or class, get updated on the changes. There may be a whole bunch of changes, or maybe only one or two slight, and then you can go back to another municipal police department and continue to work. And it's somewhat similar for federal officers, such as Amtrak officers and other things, but they are obviously trained to a federal standard and follow their guidelines, which I don't directly know what those are. But just to give you an example. So besides for that, the state mandates basically 2 8-hour sessions every year to train. We also have to requalify in CPR, our weapons management, and other things as well. So for example, you have to be able to qualify with your duty weapon at least one time under MOPEC standards. At Radnor, we qualify 2 times a year, as long as space permits and there's no illnesses and other things. The pandemic has offset that right now. Mm-hmm. So there's an example. And then you have those two 8-hour block days, which is 4 modules of training, usually broken up into legal updates, which would be anything related to law, from a simple change to a major change or a brand new law, such as DUI change, meaning driving under the influence, where they may change a penalty or change the grading of something related to how intoxicated you are or not. Then there's the vehicle code, which is ever changing, always updating. And then there's usually something that's very a social related issue, such as just whatever the particular thing may be, community policing. Then there's usually something about officer safety, where there's been something that happened significantly across the country, so they review that for officers. And then there's usually I'll call it the hot topic of the year. So in other words, all the things going on. If it's mental health training, I'll give you an example where when the military was coming back, we did a PTSD training to get us up to speed on what the military was going through when they returned from deployment, whether it be overseas or here, the stressors that go on there, which I didn't understand until I was able to go through the video-driven training. So it's allowed some things. So that's a very good block of training. It's done independently. I don't pick the selections. I have to go through them. So the chief of police to the newest officer has to update their training. So that is our baseline absolute training to be able to provide police services in the Commonwealth as a sworn police officer in Radnor Township, and many other townships have the same. Then, as we discussed in our last session, the township has as much a la carte options as they want and can fit in respective to budget, time, and having officers on duty on the road as needed for the public safety module. So, for example, we had the Anti-Defamation League in, Major Ben. We have a de-escalation training that was online driven. So we can do hands-on training. Those are the type of things that you can do outside of the scope of the minimal standard. But the minimal standard is posted for the entire community. Anybody can see it. It's up there. And it also talks about all the standards that the police officers go through to pass the academy.
Okay. So, Kevin, when you hear, about all of the different training that's, implemented and done, what is your response? What, out of all of those different things, what do you believe is something that you would like to see more of? I know the one thing I didn't really hear very specifically, and I know you mentioned it with the Anti-Defamation League, but the whole piece about culture, diversity, including that type of thing. I mean, but what would you like to see as a Black male?
Good afternoon, everyone. To be honest, I kind of piggyback on what you're just saying. I did not hear a lot about cultural training and things of that nature. I think the fact that it is an a la carte, type situation with the Radnor Police, they should be able to, I know they do the drive-bys and the Citizens Academy or whatever it's called in Radnor, those type of things, but it's important to know the neighborhoods. That's number one. Number two, the cultural training is imperative, especially today, because we just heard the stat about one Black person a week, in lieu of what just happened down in Philadelphia. Me as a Black man, I just wonder how that could have happened where he was shot. And then there could be many, many reasons because we don't know. But one thing I do know, here's another Black person being shot. So, are these white police officers and sometimes, even Black ones, or any other minority, why is it always with Black people you shoot first? So obviously there's a disconnect as to our humanity, who we are as human beings, that some police just don't get it. And for them to be on the force, they have to get it. So I know, the chief is definitely, one that is open to a lot of ideas and thoughts. And I think it's important that we do add that component. I think it's important that we do have the Citizens Academy, Citizens Advisory Board, those type of things, and have citizens that really, like I said before, have a pulse of the community and can really communicate to not only the chief, but, the officers involved, having town hall meetings and having the conversations so they truly understand our neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt neighborhoods are different, and right. No doubt cops treat people differently because, and I'm gonna be blunt. The reality of it is a white cop can go home, hey, John, how you doing? Because they know them, they live in the neighborhoods. Well, white cops don't live in our neighborhoods. So if you don't live in a neighborhood, then you might already have that initial disconnect and that stereotype that can easily lead to a confrontation. And a confrontation, because that's obviously what happened down in Philly. It was a confrontation. For some reason, it went awry, and now we have another Black man dead. And those are the things that I think should happen. He also mentioned the component of mental health. Well, as mental health is drug addiction, alcohol, addiction. There's so much that's going on. And in today's climate, because so many people are stressed, they're stressed, depressed, and every other little, mental component of life that can easily get them in a bad situation. So, but I think the cultural training and have not surface training, but you got to be more in depth when it comes to looking into these communities and really finding out, okay, what happens when I ride on Highland Avenue? You know what I mean? What happens if I ride down Lancaster Avenue, I stop somebody black, and I don't want to speak strictly from a black perspective, but in today's climate, I have to, you know what I mean? Because everybody's affected by it. And right now, it's just a sad time. And I just think, from the federal to the state to the local communities, it's important that every police department in this country takes a good look at how they are training their officers, how they're hiring their officers, the psychological training, the background of who they are. There's a lot of cops on the force that we all know are part of the KKK, part of the whatever they're called, all these different organizations. And it's scary out here. And that's why, me personally, that's why I think some of them are being shot, because there's some racist cops out here. And I'm being blunt, but that's the fact. That's the fact, so.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying there, Kevin. And I wonder also, Chris, once someone is a police officer, I don't know if you can address, like in the state of Pennsylvania, once someone is a police officer and they have the ongoing training and everything, but if you are finding that a particular police officer is not going to be able to stay in that role anymore, are they able to, be removed from that, especially like maybe on the street position or in the car position where they're, in the office, or just, they have to leave being a police officer and then, hopefully do some other kind of work that's, that they could do and, take up some other kind of job?
So I think Kevin touched on a lot of subjects, because I actually was taking some quick bullet notes. So the training, and one of the things that I've said in this police department is I don't want to ever have a family member say the person, their loved one who was a police officer here, was untrained or didn't have the proper equipment, because then it's the person inside you that applies to the situation. I think we agree that the responses that we go to, every house is different. Everybody has a different set of views, but yet categorizing some of the calls, if it's a domestic or some of the other things that go on, we have to get into some type of flow chart, an algorithm that allows us to maneuver through. Is this a law issue? Is this a mental health issue? Is this some of the other things? So many of the things are expanding on training. I did forget to mention that if the federal government says police departments have to, and going back to my training question, Diana, that if the federal government states we must have more mental health awareness training or more anti-bias training, then that gets trickled to MOPEC, and then the Pennsylvania State Police and their training academy will put that out through that training module. So it is an ever-breathing thing that is connected to the federal government, the federal standards initiative of the justice system on the federal level as well. But there's a conduit of accountability and training that MOPEC takes for every officer who has a certification number. So that answers the federal level to Diana, which I didn't mean to forget. And then it also talks to Kevin about how things change. And community policing now should be, community dynamic policing, because you have to be responsive. People now in the pocket neighborhoods, the big neighborhoods, have the ability to get more information, find out issues through Nextdoor and other communication means, where issues can be very transitional, or we can have specific problems. Like, say we don't have a tutoring program and we need one in one neighborhood, and then the other neighborhood has a transportation issue. So the challenges are different, even in a small community. A state obviously has wide variety of farming versus inner city. So those are going to be challenges. So those are the things that go on that we have to remain transitional. And I think we do. I know the municipalities in this area do remain very transitional. And that's why, following the murder of George Floyd, that many people ask certain questions. And I think people have an impression of the police department when you come in as a manager of anything that you're in charge of, and you're an excellent educator. When you come in and maybe somebody's reviewing a program you've established, you want to say, well, I got this done, this box is checked on this. I think that the police, including our agency, wants to do that because we want to prove to our bosses that, and our constituents, most importantly, our community, that we're doing a great job. We're remaining, taking the pulse of what's going on police-wise across the country and adapting to that. And I think that a lot of the local police departments have that effect. But there's a balance too, where the federal government and the state government also are able to interject and mandate training, whether I believe in it or not. Training Z, they can mandate it and move us forward. So I think it's a good checks and balances system that the community understands. And Kevin brought up something so important, and I didn't mention it, but police departments in this area, I believe everywhere, but I can't say that everybody has it. We have a field training officer program. It is so critical once you get the basics down. It's like they teach you how to do math at school, but until you're doing a sale or signing a mortgage or doing the tip at a restaurant, that's when you're really getting challenged, right? And I'm not good with tips. So with that being said, the field training officer responsibility is critical. It's now formalized. It used to be just a good guy or the guy or gal who made the most arrests. Now there's formal training for field training officers. This is an individual department decision of how long your program is and how you handle it. But getting out in the community and meeting stuff and having regular standards for how officers interact with the community, they can take a pulse. So that is very important, and it really talks to Kevin. So we have our program is almost 4 months long in its entirety. From they read in person every policy we have, every one of them. And that's so important, so that they can never say they didn't understand, because then it forces them to ask and have an interaction. That is such a long and it is a little tedious, because you're going over we go over the bike, the pedal bike policy to make sure you understand it and can't say you didn't know we had one. And there's just a breakdown. But we talk about our use of force. We read it together, even though they already were trained in it in an individual class here at the township. The state gave them training, and now we reread the policy with an independent person. They're all signed off. They're all documented, date, time. Then we start a very vigorous field training program. I'm going to really make it a little bit smaller. They have to be quiet, watch, and observe. Then they take over the steering wheel and start to get to interact. And I can ask the field training officer next to me. Then you switch another one, because we keep trading people to make sure we're not missing something. Then in your last phase, you have to operate independently. If you can't find a street or you don't know where a form is, you actually have to go get a supervisor, another officer. That officer can't help you. And each day we write down all of their things that they've accomplished in a field training evaluation report. And then it gets signed off by them, the field training officer, the sergeant, and then finally the lieutenant. And then at the end, I sign off on it. And many departments have that, and it's a significant resource. These people were allowed to go on the street the second they walked in. I could give them a set of keys, be like, here you go, hit the streets. You're up in Wayne, figure it out. But we don't do that. I would say we go the extra 10 miles to make sure that they get to understand the community. And even when I do all that, to go meet a guy like Kevin, I have to be in the car by myself, driving around, be willing to get out of the car, say hello at the Wawa or whatever it is, to get to meet him where he'll talk about it. So I'll stop talking because I went on a little bit, but there are some mechanisms to get to meet the community.
But, and I'm glad you brought all of that up, because one of my next questions was going to be, in understanding in any profession, and especially in policing, is that, okay, once you get to know the things and the policies and all that in your head, but we all know that it is the experience that starts to really hone in on what you are able to do, the assessment. So we know that people are really good in memory, knowing the policies, they can rattle them off, they can do whatever, but everybody's not so good in the application. And so we know that's in any field, that the more is experience that really helps you to take what you've learned, and then apply it. And so it's, how much time, or is there the new officer in, are they on probation? Are they whatever, how much time do you consider that to be that someone is really now getting some of this experience that they're able to apply what they've learned?
And I did describe it at length. So you have the police academy and all the standards you pass. So you got to at least do that, show up on time and get your tests and be physically fit. So that's at least a standard. But then here we're really molding people. And I said it's roughly a 3.5 month process of evaluation. Following that, you're on probation over a year here. Each department is different, but you're on probation a year. So the time in the academy does not account for that. It's basically when you show up here is when the clock starts ticking. In other words, when you're ready to go and you're sworn in. So I would call it almost a triple safety mechanism for that. And remember, in the pre-testing, which we discussed, you did take a mental health exam, making sure that the standards are in best practices, and we pay top dollar to have the best people possible working on those evaluations. And, you know, no matter how well we try, there's still always situations that occur, but we are doing our best, and it's very documented, those procedures.
So as our time is winding up again, Kevin, what will be some of your final remarks on this? Especially
well, you know,
on the training and stuff.
The main thing, I mean, I like what I'm hearing, and no doubt, you know, the whole police academy, you know, and the ride-alongs and things like that, you know, that's critical because, you know, cops are human beings like us. So, you know, it's really just having a comfort level as to when you come into a community that you're not already on guard or anything, you're more relaxed and more understanding of what's going on. But I know we didn't allude to it, but one thing I do know is the accountability. There has to be accountability. And I know one thing that I see a lot in Philadelphia is the police unions. The police union can very easily undermine, you know, the accountability of an officer doing something wrong. And I just think that's another component that we really need to, and Chief, you obviously, you know, is that when you hear something in the neighborhood of a cop doing something wrong, what truly happens? And is it transparent or is it swept under the rug? It's very important that people that have an issue, they really get a, you know, hopefully a quick response, but more importantly, the right response as to what are their concerns and are they truly being addressed, and does that person feel good about what their answer was. But I like where we're going. I like all the conversation and looking forward to more.
Okay, so our time is up, and I want to at this time thank Chief Chris Flanagan and Kevin Stroman, and the conversation that we've had on this topic. Like we said, we might have to end up with a part 3. I don't know, but I just want to conclude with saying that clearly it is a huge topic. Clearly, it is a topic that is important to the communities, and I believe the police departments as well. And so that as our viewers are listening to the conversation and may have questions and other aspects of this that they want to see, that we know that as everybody thinks about it, learns information, that it is important in doing so that we are all able to have our say. Thank you.